Hello, Will. Thanks for coming.
Absolutely, glad to be here.
So Will Rucker, you are a candidate for Nevada Assembly District 13.
You got it.
How's that going? Why are you running for office? What's going on?
You know, it's going well. It's a lot of work for sure, but I'm in Assembly District 13, which is one of our fastest growing areas here in Southern Nevada. It's where I've lived all but 1 year since I moved to Nevada in 2014. And I just felt our area needed honest representation. So for as far back as we can really think, there's been no true choice for my neighbors to make when it comes to their assembly candidate. And I'm an intersectional person. I come from a upper middle class neighborhood where I was one of like 4 Black kids. I'm a gay pastor. I'm in the health promotion space, but also own a small business. So I come with that entire toolbox of experiences that to me really resembles the folks in my district, because we're so diverse, not just through ethnicity, but through experience, through perspective, through philosophy. So that's why I'm running.
So you have all this background, this small business background, and what do you do in with your small business?
So my small business is primarily consulting and speaking. So conversations like this, facilitating amazing things. I actually just this week had a session where I was facilitating a group that's starting some restorative justice work in a different state. And so I'm helping them to build their coalition, doing some assessments. But I also, under that umbrella, officiate weddings.
Wow.
Yeah, because that's part of my speaking, so my public persona, which is really, really cool. It gives me the opportunity to do a lot of fun things. I just love to be of service to people. And one of the ways that I think we can best serve humanity is just through enjoyment and the purity of love. So being a wedding officiant gives me that opportunity.
That would be an interesting experience. I mean, just having attended weddings, it's always neat to see the officiant. But I've known some people who that was really an expression of their spiritual background, and that's really cool. With the leadership and the philosophy that you have, it sounds very compassionate and the idea of restorative justice. So what do you see in Nevada as far as our ideas around restorative justice? Is it dominant? Is it lacking? What do you think?
Yeah, that's a big question, and we could probably spend the rest of our time together on just that. You asked earlier, why did I decide to run? And one of the reasons that I decided to run was my motto has been, be the change. For as long as I can remember, I've always been the person that does what I say I'm going to do. And when I first decided to just kind of venture into politics, I never thought I would. I mean, I was very happy with being a pastor, with being a nonprofit leader, with the things I was doing. I never thought politics would be part of it. But I discovered that in this space, there's just so much dishonesty. There's so much pretense. And in order for me to truly be that voice of change, I had to put myself out there to actually occupy the seat. It wasn't enough just to have the conversations. I've been having big conversations for a long time, talking about the need for systemic change for a long time. But the reality is, unless we actually get the policies passed, then that systemic change doesn't happen. So to the restorative justice piece, a lot of people think, well, restorative justice is soft on crime. You just let bad people get away with anything. And I asked 2 questions. One is, well, how well has being tough on crime worked? Because clearly it hasn't. But also, do you really just want to punish people, or do you want to make people who've made mistakes better people? And the key part of restorative justice there is restore to who they truly are, our true sense of humanity. If you get down to the core of who we really are, we are compassionate. The nature of humanity is to be caring and to stand against harm. And so with restorative justice, what we do is, number one, we give the person that causes harm the opportunity to take ownership of their actions. Our current justice system says you're either guilty or innocent, and every lawyer will tell you, do not admit guilt. Don't take anything. And in many cases, the person that was harmed just wants to hear, I'm sorry. If you've ever had something stolen from you, you know that sending that person to jail doesn't actually get you back what was stolen. Well, restorative justice gives you the opportunity to make right that area that was made wrong. And so there are cases where even the family of the person that was harmed now has compassion and actually feels mercy and care for the person in a bullying situation that was bullying their child, because they see that the impact isn't just the two kids, it's the families. And then they get to know the person's story and understand, well, they didn't actually want to bully the kid. They were insecure and they felt alone. And so that's how they acted out. So that's a really long way to answer, to say, right now in Nevada, when people really know what restorative justice is, they believe in it and they're for it. We just have to change the narrative to make it more accurate instead of this soft on crime look.
I resonate with so much of that. And I think you say that was a long answer. It's actually a brilliantly condensed version of a complicated issue. For me, when I was doing my grad school work in ethics and policy studies, justice was this whole philosophy. And the part that I took away from it that I always remember is it's restoring to whole, individually and as a community. And sort of the justice system back in the ancient Greek days was, you did something wrong, the government imposed a thing, and once you did your thing, it was as if it never happened. It restored the community to a whole. And I've always kind of felt like that was our job as anyone who supports restorative justice. For me, my addiction led me to crime, and then it all blew up, which is the best thing that could have happened for me. Lost everything, branded a felon, had to start over with my life. By grace, I wasn't thrown in prison, although it was hanging over my head, but I was on probation, but I really was on my own as far as recovering from my addiction, trying to get a job, and then trying to, restore with restitution. So it's been a long process, but thankfully, in 2017, a package of bills passed that basically restored the right to vote for people in Nevada who had prior issues. And that's great because it increases the conversation. Part of that is I have been interested in civic life, civics, being part of community ever since I learned about it in elementary school. Definitely in my senior year of high school, I really fell in love with our constitutional republic and separation of powers and how all this works and the critical role of the citizen. And I'll boil it down to free speech, free elections, due process is the core of the republic. And I honestly never thought that I would ever see a day where I felt like that was severely threatened. And I think we're kind of there. For me, addiction disconnected me from community. And that was the biggest part. And I learned that is a lot of people's experience. It just becomes isolating and lonely. And that is really all addiction. And it can also happen with mental health generally. People get disconnected from community. So the recovery journey then for me was addressing the gambling addiction and then being humble. And my first job out of after grad school was washing dishes but starting literally over again. But I can guarantee you that I was never consciously thinking I was betting my right to vote when I was gambling. But not being able to vote for 10 years, I learned two things that were important. One, there's a lot you can do without voting, but not having skin in the game really bugged me. So I was excited to get the right to vote back. Because recovery was restoring me to community, was connecting me to community. And voting is being part of the community. And that's come down to why I chose to run. If I can vote, I can run. And I'm concerned about people being engaged with the process, taking ownership and responsibility for the government. I see a lot of sideline critique and not a lot of action and getting involved. What's your read on kind of where we are now and our community, and are a lot of people not participating and that's getting worse, or is it working fine? What is the impact of people not voting?
Wow, you covered a lot there and so many great points. And correct me, I'm paraphrasing based on what you summarized. but being a free community would have free speech and free elections. Is that the two?
And due process.
And due process. So I want to focus on the first two. I don't think that money is free speech. That's a big one. And I know we can take that all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court, right?
Citizens United.
Yeah. So, but I don't think that money is free speech. And I think it impedes free elections. And this is kind of going back to why I'm running. I try to keep that a short story because there are so many reasons that I decided to run. One of the key reasons was when I first started talking to folks, just saying, hey, I'm thinking about this. No one asked my background. Was I an axe murderer? They didn't care. It was, how much have you raised? And I was like, well, I haven't even announced yet. I haven't raised anything. Oh, well, come back when you raise $30,000. This is for a local state race. And I'm like, okay, so the qualification to be a candidate is to be a good fundraiser. Got it. Not a good legislator, not someone that has, any idea of how to govern. How do you raise money? So I think that in order to have truly free elections, we have to take away that mechanism of influence, legalized bribery. I think we need to get rid of that. The other part of that is engagement. Well, I think more people would engage if their vote actually made a difference. And I say that very harshly, intentionally, because as it stands, the politicians will tell you, yeah, we're going to go talk to voters. And I've been very intentional, or attempted to be intentional with my language, to say I'm talking to my neighbors. Because there's a difference between my neighbor and voters, because not all of my neighbors vote. But all of my neighbors should have a part to say in this great state called Nevada. I think that their perspectives, their issues, their concerns are just as valid as the person that actually cast the ballot. So I talk to my neighbors, not just the voters. And I do think there are a lot of folks that are disenfranchised. They feel as though neither party has their true interest at heart. They feel as though all politicians are corrupt and in it for the money. Well, here in Nevada, if you're a state legislator, you don't get any money. There's a little, but it's a pay cut for, I'd say, probably 90%, if not 100% of those in the office, which leads me to another big issue, which is the way that our government is set up right now. Not everybody can actually run. Yeah. You're very blessed to be in a position where you actually can do it. Once you actually win the seat, if you can keep your job, that's also a blessing, because we call it a citizens legislature. We say it's part-time. We say it's just, one session, 120 days every 2 years. That's not the reality, especially if you take it seriously. There are some folks that just do their 120 days and then turn their phone off. There are those. But for folks that I know that are doing it, they're answering questions year round. They're working for their neighbors year round, even when they're not getting paid for it. And so some have chosen to retire so that they can do this. Some are independently wealthy, and so they're just able to do it. Most are like lawyers or, that kind of thing, and their firms allow them the space to do it. So if we're really talking about free elections, there's much more to the story than just the ballot box. I do think every single person should vote, because your vote really is your voice. And when I say that most politicians only talk to voters, well, how do you get politicians to talk to you? Number one, you give them money. Yep. And number two, you vote. So if you do one of those two things, chances are, at least at the state level, the local level, you're going to have opportunity to have an audience with your representative, which, even when I say it that way, I do again on purpose, because isn't that kind of ridiculous that your representative is so distant from you? I think we have to change that. And that's what the goal of having a citizens legislature is. That's why we're supposed to come back and live with the laws we create. But the reality is, there is such a multi-tiered class system that if you're a donor, you pick up the phone, call your legislature. If they don't answer on the first ring, they're going to call you back as soon as possible. If you're just a voter, they'll get to you. If they've never heard of you, you are at the bottom of the bucket. Yeah. So I hope that kind of answers, at least begins to answer the question.
And it's interesting because it's the corporate view of politics, and I'm in a position where I don't see a lot of difference between the parties as far as they operate with regard to politicking, right? So you see the ad, looking at it, it's hard to tell who put this ad up because it's death and gloom, and then a flash of here's the other person, or it's just negative. And it's a huge industry that makes a lot of money. In Nevada, there's 63 legislators. The Gang of 63, as sometimes they're called. 21 senators and 42 assembly people, and 1,200 lobbyists. So as an assembly person, you have only during the session, you'll have one staffer who is your attaché, who basically runs your calendar. How are you going to work as an assembly person with no staff? Where are you going to get information?
Well, that's where having been a nonprofit director for many years comes into play, because we have no staff. It's one of those things where it's very similar, but we do have to fix that at the state level. It's not efficient to have the attaché for 4 months and then nothing, no support for the rest of the year. And anyone I've talked to complains about that and recognizes it. Interestingly enough, very few have actually attempted to do anything about it. So there's that piece of it. But I'm sorry, if you could repeat your question, I'll get a more direct answer to it.
All legislators are generalists. They may have certain expertise or certain something, but at the end of the day, they are generalists. So they have to rely on colleagues or staff. And without staff, how are you going to get the information you need to make?
Yeah. So you mentioned the 1,200 plus lobbyists. Before running, I had such a negative view of lobbyists. I really did. And now I am so appreciative that they exist for that very reason, because they're specialists in their area. The difference is I'm not going to be moved by the donations that come in depending on the interest group. There are some folks that follow the money. That's just never been my thing. I was very fortunate coming up, upper middle class family. So I did get one vacation a year, that kind of thing. Nothing extravagant, but at least money wasn't something that I longed for, was desirous of. It was just a part of life. So I've carried that with me even as a pastor. Sometimes I forget to take the offering at church, so it's not a motivator. But I'm very, very good at asking questions and synthesizing information. And that's really what the job of a generalist is to do, is to get all the pieces together, look at the big picture and say, what's the best solution? Now, I do have a distinction. I do think that there's a dramatic difference between the two parties. And the way that I kind of frame it is both are planes headed towards a crash. And I apologize to my colleagues that are, Democrats as well, but it's the truth and it. But the difference is the Republicans are doing a nosedive.
Yeah.
Democrats are doing a slow descent. Yeah. So I feel as though, at least with Democrats in power, we have a chance to course correct. With Republicans in power, then we don't have that opportunity. It's going to just blow up. And we will all be worse off because of it. So that's why I proudly wear the Democratic label, because we still believe in democracy. I mean, that's one part that's a clear distinction. And I also want to balance this by saying we are more alike than we are different, even in our values. So if you get into like moral psychology, which I won't bore your audience with, but there are some people that are just more open to different experiences. Those tend to be more liberal or democratic folks. There are other people who have a higher disgust mechanism. So things that are unfamiliar literally activate that like disgust mechanism, like if you had something really bad to eat. Mm-hmm. And so what happens is that same mechanism, which was supposed to prevent us from ingesting poison, because we're in a kind of a different climate, now it's like people end up in that bucket. And so that's why they other groups. So immigrants is a big group. Workers are a big group. Oh, and then workers, other billionaires and things like that. So we have to get back to this sense of common humanity and recognize for any of us to survive, we all have to work together. And so that's the other piece of how I'll get things done. is taking a collaborative spirit. A lot of people talk about let's compromise. I used to believe in compromise. I don't anymore, not as a legislator. I think compromise says I'm coming in with my idea, you're coming in with your idea, and we're going to fight until we compromise on something. Versus we have the goal in mind, and we're going to come to the table and collaborate and figure out how to accomplish the goal. So that's what I want to do. I do have plans. I have a way that I think will work. And my way is normally right. 99.9% of the time it is. But I won't bring that to the body. I'll say, here's the thing we need to accomplish. What do you think is going to be the best path to do that? And so that's where lobbyists come in. That's where senior legislators come in. That's where, folks like yourself who are experts in a lot of things come in. But that's also where our constituents come in, because I have a slogan that I borrowed from some activist groups: nothing about us without us. So I've got to ask you, what do you think? Because it can't be the right answer. But if you didn't have ownership in it, if it didn't come out of your imagination and your creativity, then you're not going to be invested. You mentioned the term skin in the game earlier. It might have been before we started recording. But that is the state's skin in the game, is did I have an opportunity to actually give voice to the solutions that you're supposed to represent me to create? One other balance on that is sometimes we don't know what's best for us. I've got this beautiful bottle of water, and water's the best thing to drink. But if you give a kid a choice between water and Kool-Aid, they're going to choose Kool-Aid. So you as a parent have to say, let's start with the water. We'll add the Kool-Aid as a dessert or something, just what's in their best interest. And I'm not at all suggesting that, the people that are not legislators are kids. I don't want to give that impression. But it is important to understand. I come from a public health background. People don't necessarily do what's best for them because of their culture, their habits, their family upbringing. Sometimes they just don't know, like sugar is a drug and it causes addiction. Most of us are addicted to sugar. I'm looking at myself for that one. So we need someone to say, hey, try a little water. Not saying you can't have any sugar, but for your sake and mine, please drink, some water. So I'll leave it at that.
You hit also on the basically the representative theory in a sense. Yes, you represent the expectations of your constituency. And one of the challenges, and this is a big one, is having those conversations with constituents, because things are complicated. And you mentioned nonprofits. One of the things I hope to do, especially in the work that I've done over the last few years, working a lot with nonprofit organizations in addiction and mental health recovery, is just because you're a 501c3 does not mean you don't have a voice. And there is a way for organizations to engage, and it's important because they have what we need, which is information. They have ground level information that's unfiltered, and empowering and accessing that and encouraging organizations to be part of the process by providing information. It gets very dodgy though, because that 501c3 status just is really, and we're missing out on a lot of good information. But as a lobbyist and in a small boutique firm, I always, those big firms, the big money firms, they just would, basically it's a big hearing, and I called it sort of the drive-by, stand and nod, wink approach. Here we are all in there working hard. Some big time lobbyist walks in during the hearing out of camera, makes eye contact with some people and lets them know they're there and walks out. Nothing of substance. And they can do that because of the money that they have done. On that note, that's something I really am also putting on the table here. One, exposing my personal life to the public. That's part of running for office. That's that piece. Having no corporate support or no machinery is another interesting experiment. How far will I be able to get? If I win with little to no support from big money interests, that should shock the system. The tools are in place. Connecting people through social media. These are the tools that were used to topple oppressive regimes in the Arab Spring. So person-to-person contact, I believe, is powerful. And that's sort of how I feel I will get around the mega media buys, because of the millions and millions of dollars that's being pumped through the state, especially this cycle. It's all going to buy media. And I'm happy to say that we stream. There's no cable. If an ad makes it into this house, how do they do it? But I think the piece there is engaging in conversation and being able to talk about it and be able to walk your way through evidence and reasoning. You said something that I really resonate to. I definitely am a synthesizer. I just sort of very observational. I love data and information, but I like to see pieces come together. And that's part of justice too. It's wholeness. I think what's interesting about your situation is you are a Democrat, running as a Democrat, but there's not a lot of investment from the Democrats in your race. How are you reconciling that?
Well, that was a very kind way to say there's no investment. No, I'm running a true grassroots campaign. Yeah. You know, the Assembly caucus is focused on saving the seats that they have, which, while, you know, it'd be great if they invested in my race, because it's absolutely winnable. And my thought is you probably shouldn't put all your eggs in one basket. You know, your incumbents, but or quote unquote safe seats. But I get why they're doing that. The other piece that I would say is I like your tagline, which is nothing changes if nothing changes. And I think back over several elections, I went to vote for Joe Biden in the Democratic primary. I shouldn't say I voted for Joe Biden, but I went to cast a ballot in that race. And I intentionally went to the historic West Side because I wanted to hear what people were saying. And the particular place I went to, the line was probably 100, 200 people. It was a great, great turnout. And I do something called ear hustling. And I'm just listening to what people are saying. And conversation after conversation went something like, I really like X candidate, but I don't think they can win. So I'm voting for Joe Biden because I know he can. And so people are forced to choose someone they don't even believe in because they don't want to lose by voting for someone that they do believe in. And that's why I'm so proud of what you're doing, because you're giving people a choice. And I think that what we have to do as a society, as a collective, is begin to do the things that are right, even when they're the harder things, to invest in the unlikely in order to see the extraordinary. And so in my race in particular, I'm very confident that we're going to come out on top. And I don't do things that I'm not just going to run into a brick wall for the sake of saying I did it. I did some very deep calculations to see, like, is it even possible? Is it even viable to win in my district? And it is. It's not only possible, it's quite likely, because people in that area want change. The population is growing and it's growing more diverse. And so they've not had a choice in the past. Now they do. The thing that has to happen is they have to believe that if they act, they can actually influence, which goes back to our earlier conversation, which a lot of people don't recognize how powerful one vote is.
Yes.
I had a canvasser volunteer yesterday go out, and she's from Arkansas, and she volunteered on campaigns down there. And she was telling me a story about someone that was an unlikely winner in the area. So she was in a highly Hispanic area, and the candidate was a blonde-haired, blue-eyed woman who didn't appear to fit the mold for someone that should represent that district. Well, that person gave a speech in English and then turned around and gave the exact same speech in Spanish.
Oh.
So, you know, totally defied expectations, which is also why we shouldn't judge a book by the cover, right? But so this jazzed up my volunteer. And so she went out and worked really hard, knocking doors and engaging her neighbors to vote for this individual. When the results came in, her candidate won by 30 votes.
30. Wow.
3-0. Not 300, not 3,000, 30. So it really can happen. If you vote for the person that you believe in, they can actually win. which is why, again, my motto is be the change. That's not, a lot of people hear that and they want other people to be they want for the change.
Right.
But I'm talking about starting with yourself. Michael Jackson said, I'm starting with the man in the mirror.
Ah,
That's where I am. So I'm not a politician. Like, I have family members that are working in the White House right now. That's their lane. Like, good for them. I'm a community servant. Like, I like being with the people. And in order to make the change I wanted to, I had to start with myself and say, well, am I going to do this even if I don't have support? Sure am. Am I going to do this even if it means I have to self-fund my campaign, which I've done a lot of? I'm so grateful for my husband for allowing me to invest our funds into this race, knowing that we could lose. So take a chance on yourself sometimes, take a chance on your belief, take a chance on your hope, and you might be surprised that it makes a difference.
again, resonates so strongly with me because, without the support of my partner, it's just me talking to myself. I mean, wandering the earth. That service, being of service and serving the community in this elected capacity, it's so compelling and it's so important that we do it. In my situation, without the machinery, without the support of lots of money, it's the underdog, total underdog. And we mentioned it earlier. When I started testing the waters around people I really trusted before I got official, I was delighted by the amount of support. And then one really good friend who had my best interests in mind just put me through the ringers as far as, do you have any money? You're never gonna work again. Why would you dredge up all this stuff about your past? But the reason I do it is because I love this community. I love the state and I love the process. And I've loved it since I was a kid. So really, part of the challenge is I want to demonstrate that stigma can be overcome, recovery is possible, and the people have the choice. The people, not the parties. I think people are best represented by elected officials that are held accountable. And that's why your race is so interesting, because you are correct in every metric that I've looked at in your district. There's a winnable margin by picking up the people who are unaffiliated. Even if you got every D vote, you still need a bump if the other side is going to overvote, But that's what's going on in Nevada that I think is super exciting. We can change the narrative because it's a plurality state. You don't need to knock it out of the park. And when I look statewide, not fewer than a quarter of Nevadans in every county are nonpartisan. So, and then the other part is when redistricting happening, and I think that's something that's specific with your district, because it's traditionally red. The Assembly Dems, they're only running in 36 races and locking up their support. I like the purity and the genuine authenticity of empowering people to use their power to vote. And everyone has that right. The pendulum swing of these and they and this party, that party is frustrating. And I hope that we can inspire people to take ownership. This challenge is, you have the numbers, you have the power. Nothing changes, nothing changes. And if you're annoyed, there's an opportunity here.
I'd like to just kind of take a moment with some of the things you said. One, you have an interesting background, which I don't have. I'm really interested in seeing like what the Oppo research on me is and what the negative ads will be, because I'm so boring. Like there's nothing to find. And I also know that makes it a bit difficult for some to relate to me, because I don't have that lived experience that so many share. And because I'm a pastor, I've been with people at their worst moments, at the funerals, when they just lost a child or a parent, when they're dealing with addiction or domestic violence. I've been with them in those moments. So even though I haven't personally experienced those things, I still have been in those spaces. And I've been with them with their weddings or with the birth of a child or the christening of their child, any of those things. So I've seen the full range of human emotion, which means I can relate to everyone. But it also means that I'm not coming in with a jaded view or an an idea of I'm coming from struggle and everything has to be bad kind of idea, which I've seen with other folks. So that's one piece. The other thing that I always encourage people to think about is when we're talking about government, we need to, in these type of races, recognize it's not the ideal versus, the candidate. It's the candidate versus the alternative. And so in my case, the alternative is a Republican who's going to obstruct the progress that we're trying to make. And if he had his way, take us back, 100 years. So on his website, which I thought was a typo at first, but then he reinforced it during social media, he said, crime causes poverty. That's not the reality, right? But that's his mindset. And there are so many of those little thinking traps that folks like him fall into that do harm us as a society and harm people with a history. So just wanted to kind of highlight that and remind folks, like, you have to compare the 2 on the ballot or 3 or whatever it may be, and pick the person that you resonate with most, and don't sit it out just because your ideal person isn't on the ballot this time. So, vote for who's there and work to get who you want on the ballot. Work to get them the funds they need to actually legitimately compete. Go out and knock doors, make phone calls, have a house party, have your neighbors come over and just say, hey, just talk to the person. We don't care what your party is. Listen to what they have to say. Because the thing that we've done so long is we've kind of said, okay, these are the 2 options. Right. And, you've got to pick a side. I've never been a pick a side person. I'm a principled person. I believe in values. What does this person bring to the table? What is their ideal? So I almost really start with what before I get to the who. And so what am I looking for? I'm looking for a future for my unborn grandkids. That means we got to do something about climate change. Got to do something about education. Got to do something about our civility as humans. So I'm starting with what and then working back to the who. But yeah, other than that, I mean, we've covered quite the range.
Yeah. I'm excited about your candidacy. As a lobbyist over the last 3 sessions, or since 2017, I've been in every session. And basically, we had allies that would introduce bills or help, move things along. One of the bills I'm most proud of is the stigma bill that we passed in 2019. And it was Assemblyman Yeager, who is likely to be Speaker in the Assembly, and that hopefully you're there to be part of that. But the power of the stigma bill was Nevada's legal language was drug addict, abuser of alcohol, and we had a lot of research on the power of words, that person first language, a person with addictive disorder, a person with alcohol use disorder, it changed the way the person was treated completely. So if they were connected to a legal system in any way, they would more likely recommend more punitive or restrictive things rather than putting the person first. And the way I described that was the law was focused on problems people have, not people who have problems. And I like that the bill changed that. I will say it's the most sweeping piece of legislation because it basically hit every reference to flip it into person first language, including the regulations as well. Another way I put it was, we don't have power over the words that people use to describe themselves or others, but we, represented through you, do have the power to change the law and that ripple effect. So I am excited about that because I think you represent taking responsibility and ownership, and also very pragmatic. And I think that's what I'm excited about in my race. If the lieutenant governor is the only person who serves in both the executive and the legislative branch, and being president of the Senate as nonpartisan, some might critique, well, how could you possibly get anything done? It's like, oh gosh, I think we will have lots of really good conversations. I loved how you talked about collaboration versus compromise, so because the compromise word has become kind of a negative word, but working together, that's what attracted me to government as a little kid or a person. It was this discussion is how we get to the better place. And if we're going to be self-governing, we have to have people involved. So I'm excited about that, and I love that. Congratulations on your race, and I really hope you pull it off. I mean, and I'm going to say it this way. I just hope you're selected by the people, because I don't think it's win-lose. I don't want to say pull it off like you snuck something. In my race, it's a long shot, but not really, because more people in Nevada are on the books as nonpartisan. And one thing about this year and this election is the true independents, nonpartisans, are gonna flip because everything else is so tight. And that really does put everything in play. So you have as much fallibility as I do, and wouldn't that be exciting? Because I think if with that mandate, it's like the people do want change, and representing their interests would be an honor and exciting. So good luck to you.
Yeah, no, good luck is good luck. Yeah. I take all of it.
Yeah.
and thank you for that. I'll add this one last piece because you sparked it for me. I'm a systems guy. Yeah. And so the way that I explain systems is using the example of an iceberg. That tip you actually see is only 10% of the iceberg, but the particular language you talked about is what I call the ocean, or whatever it's floating in, which are our assumptions, our beliefs, our values. And what that bill did was begin to shift the actual substance of the iceberg, not just what you see at the tip. And I think that's what you're talking about with the people, getting the people's choice there, letting them know like there can be real change to what they see if they just simply believe differently. So
see what happens. I mean,
that was real motivational speaker.
Yeah,
I sifted into my spiritual realm because I do that, but it really is true. The way that change happens, it starts in consciousness. Everything that, like, we're sitting at this table, this used to be a tree, so we had to shift what it was. You're in a lamb right now. The wool suit. I don't know what it actually is, but maybe it's silk. Maybe you're a silkworm right now. But everything that we have is the result of someone dreaming, someone imagining, someone envisioning what possibilities could be, and then using what they had to create it. And so if we really want a government that is for the people, that is of the people, that is by the people, that is actually something that's helping people, then people got to get involved.
Another thing I want to definitely represent or encourage is, if I can do it, anyone can. I mean, a lot of people, congratulations for running. It's like, well, I just paid a fee and fill out a form. I mean, it's not that exciting. Again, thank you so much for your time, and we'll see you on the trail.
Sounds good.
It'll be awesome. Cool beans.